Unquestionably, I am so very honored to have the opportunity to present to one of the greatest publics in the world, and that is the racing public. I came into racing at an early age. My dad was affiliated with the Pimlico race course, and when I stayed affiliated, he worked for Pimlico, the Maryland Jockey Club. And we, as youngsters, were very well acquainted with some of the old-time jockeys that came to my home, and they were very much impressive to me. We had so many good memories from that old, outstanding structure called Pimlico. We began at an early age. I think I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I can recall my little brother, and we called him brother, and in fact he was named after that great poet Edgar Allan Poe. And we called him brother. And I can hear him say, someone asked you, how's your brother? He said, Daddy has taken Junior, which they called me in those days, to Pimlico. And to Pimlico I went at least twice a week, because my dad was employed there in the jockey's quarters and the racing secretary's office. In those days, I think he was a porter in the racing secretary's office, and had made many friends. And some of the racing secretary's office, my dad was a courier for them, a trusted servant. And we saw many good jockeys and good horse trainers come through that area. And I was upstairs, fortunately, in the jockey's room. There was people there who were very fond of me and very courteous to me because of my dad's affiliation, and more so his friendship with them and their friendship with him. I saw a young fellow by the name of Sonny Workman. He was like an Eddie Caro of his day. And we used to gather at the window facing the 7/8 pole, or that's the bottom turn, and we had a perfect view of the horses going into that turn, not only for the Preakness but all the races. And I was enthused, and there was a lady there who was like a caterer to the racing office staff, and her name was Miss Charlotte. And I never forget, Miss Charlotte never failed, or the milkman never failed, to bring me a pint size or a little less of milk. And that was every time I would come to Pimlico. The horses were also vivid going by that window, and I just couldn't keep my mind on anything else, even after I left Pimlico, about Pimlico. And some of them would give me souvenirs of the jockey's whip, maybe one that had been broken, but nevertheless, they would always be so courteous to me. And in that, and not even realizing that someday that this introduction to my being involved in racing would be on this fabulous entertainment segment called television. And I was also, in these later years, very thankful because I've seen such great horses such as War Admiral, Seabiscuit, Shaladon, and many other Maryland favorite runners, and many Preaknesses that I had witnessed from that viewpoint there in that jockey's room. And we gathered together every morning, and I saw so many outstanding riders that in later years that I had heard about. And I think when I also joined the racing colony as an exercise rider, and I was about 12 or 13 years of age. And I worked for a gentleman by the name of Frank A. Bonsall. And the gentleman who invented the totalizator, and his name was H.L. Strauss, was my first employer. And what a fine gentleman he was. And he had a Afro-American trainer on his farm there in Reisterstown, Maryland, and it was called Cherry Hill Farm. Even back to those days, I'll never forget that title. And his office, he had an office, and his business was right there on Reisterstown Road. My greater involvement was exercising horses, and I was fortunate enough through Mr. Bonsall's outstanding characteristic as a horse trainer to be involved with some of Maryland's most outstanding horses. We had a horse by the name of Pilaster, and he belonged to Mr. Strauss, whom I might retract a statement. Mr. Strauss also owned a track in Florida called Tropical Park, down in the land of sunshine. And though I had no idea of ever going to Florida, nevertheless, it was an impressive introduction to his prowess as a entrepreneur or racetrack owner, and especially the mutual machines. I can credit Mr. Bonsall for acquainting me with some very nice horses, and one was by the name of New Moon, who was owned by Mr. Strauss, And at one time, he was the leading money winner of Maryland Breads. And he was a favorite even with my family. When they learned that his name and what that name meant, they had much interest in racing. So I can readily assure you that when they say, or someone professes the title, oh, he's a racetracker, well, more or less, that's what I was, a racetracker. And I went to school, like most of the boys, and we just were involved with horses. And most of the youngsters around the Timonium area, most of them were racetrack aficionados. And in later years, I was able to view many racetracks in this state and in other states. New York and Jersey wasn't even in existence at that time, but nevertheless we moved on to New England, which was tracks like Narragansett, Rockingham Park in Rhode Island. Oh, I was quite a traveler as a young man. And today, I try to recall the memories that really cherished and encouraged me to continue, even after being a U.S. soldier during my age that was being conscripted or drafted. And I would always be looking out the window of the horse van and to see if our farm where horses were raised and reared. I recall one of the greater names in racing, Mr. Alfred Vanderbilt, and his farm up there, Sagamore, J.W.I. Martin, and those people were prominent in racing, and also some of the Glen Riddle outfit. And that Glen Riddle was the owner of that great Triple Crown winner, War Admiral. So my racing career has been enriched and delightful, and the people that I have met and who have been so courteous and influential in my life, they have been what we announce as a blessing, and hoping that it is a continual situation, and that there will be always some racing appreciation and appreciation of the racing industry in my maturing or in my later years, and hope that it will continue. But Pimlico brings back cherished memories. I think I was about 9 years old, 9 or 10, when I witnessed one of the most prestigious races, where even the President of the United States, it was reported, sort of put forth the effort to tune in the War Admiral Seabiscuit event or horse race, which was world renowned. And what a congratulatory day that was. No one can ever deny that. The fans, it was euphoria when that race was put together, when that race started, when that race finished. It was so glamorous and really depicted how great racing was and had its place in the world of sports.
They called it the race of the century, a match between War Admiral and Seabiscuit. This meeting of the year's top horses sees War Admiral the heavy favorite, but it's Seabiscuit who takes the lead in the stretch and pulls away to the frenzied cheers of 40,000 fans at Maryland's Pimlico. Biscuit became one of the biggest money winners of his day.
I'm going to recall some of the great riders that I had the good fortune of being or watching and seeing racing like racing's jockeys like Georgie Wolf, which they call the Iceman, and he participated in that race with the Triple Crown winner, War Admiral. He rode a horse in that race. The horse was Seabiscuit, and he defeated a Triple Crown champion. That was one of the highlights of my young career. I had whips that had been worn out or going to be thrown away, and I had been a recipient of some of those replicas, and I kept them in my possession all during my school years, my elementary school years, and we always cherished them with my family. And my dad was also a racing aficionado. My dad was affiliated with one of the greater boxing champions of this age, and his name was Joe Gans. And Mr. Gans was of Baltimore and a resident, and I think Baltimore born. And he defeated all comers. And boxing was a very important sport in those days. And he owned a hotel by the name of the Gold Field Hotel. Many sports-minded persons used to attend that hotel, which was a very prominent place. I looked to become one of the most well-traveled young fellows. As I stated, I started early in this business. I was 13 years old when some of these informative information was it that I am giving you. I was an exercise rider, and I worked for a gentleman. I think I mentioned his name was Frank A. Bonsall, and he was a prominent trainer. Later, we acquired some horses for Mrs. Marion DuPont Scott, which was a prominent Virginia horsewoman, and she employed some of the finest jumping horses and riders that ever graced the American turf. And some of the fellows, and one, he was an Afro-American, was named Brooks. Norman or Knott's Brook, it was a family of them. And they were and jumping horses were very prominent in the Maryland annals of history. We left Pimlico, and the next stopover would be Laurel, Maryland, which was also a fine racing center. From there, we would go to Bowie, Maryland, also a winter racing quarters. And I exercised horses at each of these tracks, and there were some fine, outstanding Afro-American riders, and the Spanish contingent of riders became familiar, and we have what they call the Washington, D.C. international races, and that drew attention from some of the foreign contingent, people who came from England, Ireland, and all parts of the outside United States horsemen. I recall a gentleman by the name of Tom Barry. He was from one of the famous areas of Ireland, County Cork, and I was able to acquire the representing his apprentice rider. That is, an apprentice rider is a rider is not yet fully recognized as a journeyman. And horses that ran at Laurel were outstanding performers. I myself was so enthralled and enthused about moving toward the next town, which was Bowie, Maryland. Bowie was a winter racing center and had some fine racing, and horses from all over Maryland raced at Bowie. Bowie was a familiar name to some of the most outstanding Triple Crown winners. In fact, the stable there at Bowie, Maryland, which was close to Washington, D.C., had reared 3 Triple Crown winners. Gallant Fox was one of them, and they raced at Bowie until December, and it was a very popular stopover for horses going to Florida. And they gave you some thrilling horse racing there. My next stop as an exercise rider and horseman was being able to be recognized as a exercise rider, and later was matured into a racing official, which was a prominent and very inspiring moment for me. And there was a lady who became a racing official, one of the first, and her name was Miss Georgianne Hale, which is still the racing official at the track at Laurel and Pimlico. I was able to venture on to the Florida racing scene. There was a track there by the name of Gulfstream Park, and that seemed to be a lucky stone for me. And I became a jockey's agent, and I was fortunate enough to acquire the services of some of the outstanding riders in action around that area. And for 2 years in a row, I represented the leading rider. His name was Michael Mickey Solomon, and what a jockey he was. Very prominent, very capable, and a uplifted for me for his continuous winning. And considering Florida, which I had never been ventured into as a racing person. The next track I was able to encounter, or the next track where I became accustomed to winning, was Gulfstream again. I repeated my earlier performance as a jockey's agent, and I had a rider that I brought from the north. His name was Joseph Imperato. He got his start here in Maryland and was equally as prominent in the Florida racing scene. And the weather was very lovely also. And I'm going to tell you, racing is an enthusiastic and a very cherished sport in these United States of America. Horses come from the islands, the Caribbean, everywhere. You will be afforded an opportunity to make acquaintances with outstanding owners, trainers, exercise boys, jockeys. This is the place to be. There was another trainer who got his start in Maryland as a trainer, and he went to Florida, and together with the jockey that I represented, we won they call the New Orleans Handicap. We went on to New Jersey and followed the circuit. and his name was William Sonny Hightower, an African-American trainer raised in this great state of Maryland, where so many outstanding horsemen got their start, the same as I did. One of my favorite memories was one evening at Saratoga Racetrack, and I represented it as a jockey's agent, a jockey by the name of Antonio Tony Grail, and we won 4 races practically in a row at the great and famous Saratoga Racetrack. This was one of my unforgettable and more prominent in my mind and on my schedule of accomplishments that day. And one of Maryland's famous trainers was Mr. Richard Dutrow, who has since deceased, and we cannot ever forget the great trainer Alan Jerkins. Yeah, Timonium was a summer resort more or less for the Maryland youngsters, and they had what they called the Timonium Fair, which was a very lovely place to acquaint the children or youngsters with the horse industry, because in those days the kids were not permitted to come into the track, and certainly not to bet. But the fair was a big event for all parts of Maryland, not only for the Timonium area, but all parts of Maryland. They would come, and the farmers would bring their products that they had grown through the winter and over there to sell. And I was really had become a racing official also at that track. That was my first introduction of being a racing official at Timonium. And on the hill there, before you go into the fair, we had a station there where we would observe the horses, and I was known as a patrol judge, and was given a good opportunity to expand my ability as a racing official right there at Timonium. And in the meantime, I took entries for the horses that were to be entered, or that were to run in the later races or the coming races. And so I was doing very well. Also, Timonium is a very popular area for all of Maryland. Some of your top racing entrepreneurs would visit Timonium, bring their families in there, and it was sort of a family track. And fortunately, I had been affiliated or familiar with Timonium, because when I was a kid, my dad used to bring me to Timonium. before I really became embedded in the racing center or the racing field of endeavor. And you wouldn't, I finished that meeting. It was only 10 days, but it was a delightful 10 days. And another person that I want to thank very much was Mr. Charles Lang. Chick Lang was his racing notification to the racing world, and he gave me many opportunities and did his best to keep me afloat and aware, and every opportunity that he could throw my way, he was there to help me. My regards to him, his family, and above all, to racing. No sport in America has continued with the outstanding gift of pleasing John Q. Public than horse racing. Also, Mr. Lang was one of the entrepreneurs of some of the greatest stakes run at Pimlico Racetrack. He was the general manager and vice president, and he started around the same time that I did. And all Maryland racing personnel are familiar with his love for racing and for racing public. Looking forward to your attendance and your desires, as I have, and I have always, even as a youngster. The light has not waned, and racing is trying with all its might to please you, John Q. Public, to be a fan forever, and to keep our Maryland status as a horse racing state. My regards to all of the great people who attend and all of the not so great fans of racing.